We would be inviting Dr. Ndidi Nnoli-Edozien, who was appointed a full-time member of the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, in June 2022, and has had an outstanding career working on several boards, committees, and initiatives. She has a PhD in social ethics, cultural adaptation, and sustainability and governance from a university in Germany, and a bachelor's degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Ndidi would be speaking about understanding sustainability disclosure and their implications, future implications on Nigeria. She will talk about the ISSB's mandates, S1 and S2, in terms of overview of the challenges and opportunities, and then the future of the ISSB. Let's put our hands together as we welcome Dr. Ndidi Nnoli-Edozien to this podium. Thank you.
I will be remiss if I don't say that, and it's a celebration actually, my father-in-law, His Royal Majesty Professor Edozien of Asaba, passed 2 days ago. So I have delayed traveling out to Asaba to be here with you today, just so that you know how important this is. He was 99 though. So while we are sad that, of course, in his birthday in July, and of course it's very touching, we can't celebrate his 100, we celebrate 99. And I say this also because, you know, sometimes when you're so close to something that is a milestone, and I think that's where we are on this journey, and I think that's what we're hearing in the room. If you don't pay attention and you don't value every single moment, even though you're so close, you can still lose it. So I want us to really pay attention to this. And right now, one of the magical things that's happening is, so SAB actually sits on one of the advisory boards of the ISSB. And what I'm trying all the time is to encourage, so MTN and Dangote sit on the Transition Implementation Group of the ISSB. And I can keep going on. Right now, the Interpretations Council of the IASB, to interpret the financial standards, they're looking for additional board members. And a few days ago, we had the negotiation of, there's already an African, can we have another African, right? I will expand it and say more Global South, more Global South. That's my mission for 2024. I won't just speak for Africa. I'll do Global South as well. And so I just want you to keep looking at that IFRS Foundation website for openings, because if we're not at the table as part of the discussions, that's not going to happen. We cannot shape things unless we're there. So that's really key. And there are various opportunities. And IFRS Foundation is growing because of the expanded scope of work it's doing, and I'll speak a little bit to that. Seb, I really, so when we did a capacity building workshop, the first one I think that was held on IFRS S1 and S2 anywhere in the world, it was held with Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria and NGX coordinated. It was online. I think we did it for different industries. We did it on the SASB standards, but on S1 and S2 in particular, and I'll speak about industry guidance in a moment. But we only were able to do it because we leaned on Latin America's work, Arturo. So I called Arturo and I said to Arturo, you've done so much on SASB. My people don't understand what SASB is. It's another one of those acronyms that could be a cow or a chicken or a goat, right? So what SASB is, and I'll speak about that in a minute as well to the slides, is SASB is industry-based guidance. And when you pick up S1 and S2, you'll see that there's guidance associated with it. They've been integrated into S2, which is the climate standard, and they're as separate related to S1, which is the overall sustainability standards. Now, even though it means that you're looking at a document that is a lot fatter, and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to read all this English? The beauty of the industry-based standards is you can pick up your standard. So there's, for example, telecommunications technology, or there's mining. You know, you can pick up your standard, and in that standard has been curated the metrics, the climate-related and other related metrics that investors look at for your industry. Because if you do anything to do with sustainability, you would have heard you have to do a materiality assessment, which is find out what are the material risks and opportunities, what are the material indicators, what is going to impact your business generally that stakeholders care about, right? What the ISSB and the IFRS Foundation is focused on in sustainability is what are the material metrics that investors care about. Now, some people have criticized us, for example, Europe, and they've said, look, it's not just about investors. Why are you facing only financial markets? There are many, many other stakeholders that need to be cared about, and we understand that, which is why when I go through the slides, you'll see the building block approach, and Sebastian has done very well in terms of introducing that. But you know what? Every journey, you've got to start somewhere. And where you start has got to align with where your strength is. And where you know what you will do exceptionally well, and you'll do it in a manner that nobody else can do it as well as you. And that's what the IFRS Foundation is doing with its international sustainability standards. And I think I can start the presentation here, because now the slides may begin to make sense. Let's hope they do. And now I'm locked out. No, I'm not locked out. Okay. So in terms of the first slide, let me just explain. So before I joined the ISSB, which sits here, the International Sustainability Standards Board, together with this gentleman over here, and also Marilyn, who's just left the room, and a number of other members of what we call the Nigeria Integrated Reporting Committee, we sat in 2021 and we looked at IFRS Foundation's global consultation, and they were asking, we, the IFRS Foundation, do accounting standards that are applied in 140 countries across the world. Almost the whole of Africa reports using IFRS accounting standards. Should we do sustainability standards? It's not that they woke up and said, we want to do sustainability standards. They asked. And I remember that big debate internally that we had. At that time, I had no idea I would join the ISSB. And in Nigeria, we felt absolutely yes, because this alphabet soup of sustainability standards is too much. And plus, it doesn't speak to us. Are we supposed to be doing this? One person reports using this, another person reports. We need something that speaks to everyone. At the time, I was the Group Chief Sustainability and Governance Officer at Dangote Industries. So in charge of the group. And I wasn't sure where I was going to start sustainability reporting first. We were not doing sustainability reporting. And I remember when I came into the organization, a lot of people came to me and said, sustainability, good luck. You know, good luck. Now, the beautiful thing is that in my past life prior to that, I'd done research in 2006. I did a PhD on sustainability and governance. Now, this is where this ties into your story, Sebastian. My inspiration for sustainability and governance was drawn from a rating methodology, or the substance and research that built into a rating methodology that is used by a company called ISSESG. If you've heard of them, they're in the interim, I think they're the third largest rating entity globally. And if you go check them out, because they do ratings for companies, they've also done your rating. They're like Sustainalytics or other entities. And the research I did was, and there were 3 pillars that were used for this research. The first one was socioeconomic, the other one was nature, and the third pillar that my professors who founded this used was culture. And they had a research group made up of people from all over the world. We were 3 Nigerians in that group that were researching, how do you apply this? Now, when these 3 pillars went into the mainstream and became Ökom AG's rating system, and then ISSESG's, and they've rated 8,000 companies across the world, they could not take culture because they couldn't figure out how to use it. And my PhD was, because there was a culture pillar, I had the privilege of being able to look at 200 tiny enterprises and figure out what is sustainability and governance in our traditional culture. not fancy big businesses, but really smaller businesses that are Nigerian. And my conclusion was that we are embedded with sustainability and governance, and we know this thing in our DNA, and we have always practiced it. But when we entered into the formal world, we forgot who we were in the informal world. It's the same thing to do with ethics. It's the same things to do with integrity. When we somehow leave our, traditional, real core selves and go to work and wear our suits and so on, we get confused. And so what we've got to do is we've got to marry these two things. And let me bring it home. The biggest struggle, so my father-in-law was a professor. He was once a professor at MIT. He was the dean of the medical school at the University of North Carolina in the US. He resigned from that job 35 years ago or more to come home and become a traditional ruler, a king of his kingdom. And his biggest struggle was marrying, and this is what he did very, very well, that what he learned there and what we value here. And the marriage is in between, because you see, one of the big things about environment and when we're talking about climate, in our traditional culture, our climate, at least I'm Igbo, my traditional culture is in the land. So when you say culture, it says omenani or omenala. And ani and ala are land. And everything actually is embedded in that land. Now take that into agriculture. How do you do agriculture without your land? When you talk about forestation, deforestation, in traditional society, there were parts of the forest that nobody touches. It was called sacred. How is that different from UNESCO's natural preservation of land? Well, let me give you another example. When I first went to visit the Dangote refinery, there was, to build a refinery, you have to take away the trees, right? To build many things, that's what we do. There was an oasis in the refinery when we were building it. Nobody touched. I'm telling you that must be an oasis of biodiversity. Why? Because it was a place of traditional ancestral worship. Now we have, I don't want to use a bad word, the B word came to mind, but we have abused our traditional knowledge and worship systems as non-Christian. But guess what? Those knowledge systems preserved our land. They preserved our forests. They kept an integrity between doing business, an individual and their relationship with the community, their ecosystem. I used to go to Osun State a lot, Osun River, which is a goddess, right? Oshobo, thank you. Yes, I've even been inside that, the shrine there. But the point is that you worship the river. And then I found out recently in New Zealand, they created a legal system whereby they were able to identify the legal identity of a river, so that they gave that river a voice. And because they gave the river a voice, I'm coming back to the point of, if you're not sitting at the table, you can't influence things. So their thinking, building traditional, knowledge into modern knowledge systems was, let us give this, after all, companies have a legal entity and they become a legal person. So why can't a river be a legal person? So the river had representation at the table. I thought that was fascinating. Really powerful. And so one of the things I'm asking myself is, so going back to this over here, 3 years ago, nobody ever believed that an IFRS foundation with accounting standards would be leading sustainability. And I can tell you that IFRS Foundation is changing. We had our first shared board meeting, IASB and ISSB, meeting together last month. And it was a really, really inspiring and profound meeting. And it begins to pave the way towards what is the connectivity between, and you see, this is one of the big challenges that IFRS Foundation is trying to address. What are the financial effects of sustainability-related risks and opportunities on your financial statements, on the valuation of your company, on your ability to create cash flows, on your ability to actually attract capital? That's where we're going with this. And that's why actually we must all be supportive. This whole debate of GRI or IFRS, it's a non-debate. Because first of all, we're totally working with GRI. In Singapore, we've set up a hub to work on supply chain and smaller entities and how you collaborate in that regard. We have joint sessions. So it's a non-debate. If anybody tells you, oh, should it be this, or just ignore them, because it's really waste of time. So back to this. As a result of a consultation, it was decided that the IFRS Foundation should also have something called an International Sustainability Standards Board. And that International Sustainability Standards Board is who I represent and who have created these two standards called S1 and S2. So the second, and I forgot to look at the time when I started. Can you just tell me what time I'm supposed to end? Because I like keeping to time. So there are two sets of slides. This is the abridged version. I wanted the longer version, but since I have the abridged version, I'm just going to speak as the Spirit moves me. In fact, I thought to myself just now, if I'm talking about being grounded, right? And if I want to say something that you really, really, really will remember, then what I should do is I should do something that you will remember. And so I'm going to take off my shoes. So that you remember, because I'm on the ground. And that's what I wanted to get us to see, that we've got to define this our way. And so when Sebastian said, look, 5% of the responses that we got were from the global south, and 85% of the population of the world is from the global south, that's the first thing that I want to hold us accountable for. We cannot only contribute 5% if we're shaping the future. We have to become more active in all of our circles and in every single way. And what's even worse, which he didn't say, was that 5% was actually already a good response on S1 and S2, because for the agenda priorities, when IFRS Foundation went out and said, what should we focus on next? Should it be human capital? Should it be human rights? Should it be biodiversity and ecosystems? Should it be integration and reporting? I can tell you that Africa only did 3.5% in responses. And I was in shock, because the social is what we've always shouted about. So what is the point of shouting about it at our tables, in our homes, in our offices, if when there's an opportunity to influence, we don't stand up and make our voice heard? So that's really, really something that we need to address. How do we make sure that we, and I don't know, Marilyn, whether it is, advisory firms that actually need to engage and be the anchors for such consultations, or larger firms that need to consult their supply chains and their value chains and assign somebody to be the respondent for that. I don't know what the answer is. Or investors who need to say, well, look, this is going to influence materially the viability of our institutions on the ground and our ability to attract capital and capital flows into the continent. Because at the end of the day, what the ISSB focuses on are the material risks and opportunities that potentially impact cash flows and prospects of an entity, and therefore are able to attract. And Jude has left, but when the S1 and S2 standards were launched, they were launched in 7 countries across the world. 2 of those countries were in Africa. One of them was South Africa, and the other one was here at the NGX. So in other words, Nigeria has always been there. When we went to, after the ISSB was formed in 2027 at COP27 in 2022, the first country again that was announced as potentially adopting the standards was Nigeria. So you are ahead and you need to stay there. And what's really important is that, there's a range of organizations, G20, G7, IOSCO, which are 130 jurisdictions across the world that have adopted and endorsed the ISSB standards. That's a very important detail. So they're not just, maybes or nice to haves, they're actually going to happen. Now, in terms of market demand, the idea was to provide material information So decision, useful, comparable information. We heard from the presentation before what we've done with accounting standards and risk. We've created one language that can be spoken across a range of jurisdictions. And in this particular instance, it's really to make sure that this language is language that investors find useful, that they can use as a tagline to make investment decisions and simplify essentially the alphabet landscape. So when Seb showed his slide about all those different acronyms, to really simplify it so that, you know, for someone who's new to sustainability standards and also accountants particularly, which are in every organization, it's written in the accounting standards language, but with a sustainability nuance. And secondly, it borrows a lot from the accounting standards in order to write the sustainability standards. For example, the definition of material is exactly the same thing as the definition of material in accounting standards. And that, of course, implies to investors because you use financial statements to make your investment decisions. I keep losing the, and let me pause for a second to see if there are any questions. Actually, I really love questions in the process of presenting. None? I've got it now. Key milestones: launched the standards in June, the FSB, TCFD, so the task force, this is very important to note as well. It's called Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So the idea was, what are the climate-related metrics that may have an impact on your financial statements? Now let me try and bring that home. Yesterday, we were having a conversation. So yesterday, I was in Abuja with our Financial Reporting Council Nigeria colleague. We had meetings with the presidency, with NCCC, so the National Climate Council for Climate Change. And when we were sitting in the Vice President's office, we were speaking to somebody who is responsible for agriculture. And what he said was that 5 years ago, to give you an example of cocoa, which is in Ondo State, largely, but also other states in the Southwest. Europe warned us that any cocoa that comes from an area where the trees have been planted, and that area was a victim of deforestation, is no longer going to comply with European standards. And what you don't know is that you may think, oh, you know, if we cut or slashed or burned the land, 10 years later, nobody's going to know that we did it. No, it's in the trees, because the trees pick it up from the soil. Trees tell you everything, right? What he said was that 5-year period comes to an end at the end of this year. And technically speaking, sesame and cocoa exports from Nigeria, which I didn't know, are worth $2 billion of trade. So what is going to happen as a result of the European standards and requirements and various other trade regulations and requirements is climate-related requirements are going to effectively determine whether you can sell your products out of Nigeria or not. Whether you adopt ISSB standards or you don't adopt ISSB standards is going to hit you. And what's worse is that, and this is where the informal sector comes in, it's not going to necessarily even impact, it will impact the large entities, but it will impact millions of people at the base of the pyramid in this country. And if we already think it's bad, it's going to get worse. And I don't want to be a naysayer or a doomsayer. I just want to remind you that, look, the world is also talking about transition plans. And when we talk about climate-related targets in the ISSB standards, we talk about climate-related targets that are linked to your national, so your NDCs, national determined contributions, which is also a voice, because you also need to tell our leaders to step up on the climate discussions at a global level. And I keep getting mails from people globally, just like, you know, Seb, you had to enter into a conversation with someone. And I'm sure that once you came up with the idea, this is what I want to do in the global south, they were like, take our money, right? And it happens all the time. And the last time I had a conversation with a DFI, they were like, we want to give money to Nigeria, but there's nobody interested. Nobody's asking us. And the other thing that I said in Abuja yesterday is I said, because they were like, oh, well, why is Kenya getting so much more attention than Nigeria? And I said, because President Ruto is speaking. He is heard. So if we are not speaking globally on this issue, then it's like we're not serious. So I'm speaking to the people in the room who have friends, who have friends, who have friends, because we need to influence leadership as well. But what I wanted to say with the issue of the informal sector and the standards is that it's real and it will impact not just company prospects, but it will also impact trade. And I think the question that you've raised, Seb, if I can use this opportunity right now actually to talk about that idea, it's actually something that we've been thinking about internally. And I'm going to call out MTN for a second, simply because they anchored a meeting together with Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria just before the Adoption Readiness Working Group last week. And that roundtable meeting was, okay, so we have the challenge of Scope 3, which we know is going to be difficult and costly. There's transitional reliefs associated with it, etc. But how do we make Scope 3, which also involves supply chain, value chain, smaller entities, the informal sector, how do we make it not just a compliance exercise? How do we make it count, right? And how do we use that opportunity to collect data that actually also makes sure that we're living people, lifting people, and creating a truly African story? And so I'll tell you another story now, because I took Edward's permission to do so. So in my last life, even before Dangote, 25 years ago, when I was still young, I created this organization called Growing Businesses Foundation. And one of the first entities that partnered with it was MTN. And so those two entities empowered 10,000 women with phones, solar power, and Yagi antennas. And it was momentous and real. Now it seems like it's nothing because mobile penetration is everywhere. But I remember the IFC gave that project $450,000, which was a big deal at the time. And then when the project officer who fought for that went to his village in the east over Christmas, he called excitedly, not from his phone, but from one of the rural women's phones. And he was like, Kai, Ndidi, my phone is not working in my village, but I found one of your vendors, lives just 3 houses away. So that's how I'm making my phone calls now. And to tell you another story, one of these women, right, one of the first, because we started with 5 women, and then over 8 years it became 10,000. One of the first 5 women ended up empowering 15,000 women of her own. Just a very powerful story. And the other one ended up having 23 employees, and she was more business-minded. Anyway, that project over 8 years happened. The problem with CSR and actually non-profits, and I say it having founded GBF, which is now 25 years old, has 300 staff, it's still doing work. The problem with non-profits is that they don't scale. And I remember when I was very young, the first NESG presentation I gave, I told 2 stories, a cucumber story, and I told a starfish story much, much later. And it was, you want to impact millions of people if you're in a country of 200 million. And I'm very ashamed to say that that 10,000 Women project evolved, is now implemented separately with 3 entities. So with one entity, and I will just name them because we need to build. Should I name? I'm not marketing for anybody, but let me just name. Over, I think, either 8 years or 10 years, so I'm not operationally involved right now, which is what you're supposed to do when you find something. They're supposed to fire you and then keep running, right? So 13,000 women, all women, across about 1,300 communities across Nigeria, either people who are unemployed but very deep rural, generates 7% of Unilever's turnover in Nigeria from selling products door to door. And that's how they keep themselves alive and thriving. And during COVID, when revenues overall went down, these women's revenues went up. Why? Because they were reminding people to wash their hands. because it saves lives. And because it's a home model, they go to people. So together they touch about 2 million homes in their communities. Because it's a door-to-door model, what they can also do, and what they did as a result of a very smart campaign that one of the staff did, is rip off a piece of your wrapper and use it to cover your mouth. Because you see, our advocacy did not reach the rural areas. So because of that heart and mind selling, and because of the purpose of what they were doing, revenues went up. Does it make sense? Same project concept with Coca-Cola became the opposite. I think it's 2,871 women now. Anyway, almost 3,000 women are collecting plastic bottles because Coca-Cola decides, I want to try to make my plastics out of waste, not new, right? They're generating income. I think last year they made 3 billion naira from the plastic that they bought and brought back to aggregators. So that reverse logistics. And then, of course, Guinness also has 1,000 women, and the story carries on. So I need to run through my slides very quickly. The point is that there are opportunities to actually, if you think about it, so MTN's idea is, how do I now get cost-effective and affordable data? And how does that data in people's hands translate back into financial emissions data for scope 3? I don't know whether this strange story makes any sense. And I've diverted a little bit, but I'm just saying that it's not, we need to find our own ways that are grounded of addressing this in exciting, collaborative, powerful, and empowering ways. And that there are people across the world who are looking for models like this to fund. So I didn't want to just end up, and if you go on the 13th, or if you dial in online, my colleague here is doing the presentation on the 13th, and he's going to be much more detailed. And there's a second set of slides that are actually much more detailed than even these ones. And I've sent those in because you can literally read them and see a lot more for yourself. And so now I'm going to walk you through the rest of this so that you actually have an idea of what's in the slides. So that previous slide was really who has adopted. And as we already know, last week the Adoption Readiness Working Group launched the roadmap to adoption of the ISSB standards on the floor of the exchange by the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. If you go onto the website, you will find that link. Dr. Anyahara will talk about it in a minute, but please, again, contribute to that consultation, because it's been a year of work ensuring that what the regulator in Nigeria does is not impose standards. Rather, listen, just like you said as well, and that's what this forum is for, to make sure that we're following a particular trajectory that works for everyone. So here, this is really, the collaboration that we have across the continent, and this speaks to why we're focused on capital markets and what we're trying to do in terms of the baseline. This speaks to the different standards, so integrated reporting. And there what I wanted to say is that it's really, really, really important to understand that the ISSB standards, they are made up of already a number of different standards, and they're linked to other standards. Integrated reporting is one. The SASB industry-specific standards that I talked about are another. TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, that were built over a decade and that were handed over to us. And what's important about TCFD is they have 4 pillars. Governance is one. Strategy is another. Risks and opportunities is another. Targets and metrics is a fourth. Now imagine if you're an agriculture business and you're trying to project your future without considering the impact of climate, how much rainfall there's going to be, or even right now, as we heard, traceability and what inputs you used. Does your business have a future? Is any investor going to really give you their money if you haven't considered climate-related or sustainability-related risks? Does anybody think that an investor will give their money? I don't think so. So it's an imperative and it's necessary. This is the building block approach. And with the integrated reporting standards, just to clarify that as well, the financial statements of the IFRS and the sustainability-related financial disclosures and everything that Seb described in terms of impact focus, multi-stakeholder focus, GRI, these standards are built in such a way that they are building blocks that stack upon one another. And then if you look down here at what's called integrated reporting, which is now part of the IFRS Foundation, what the integrated reporting framework says, and which is baked into S1, is that value creation for a company is inextricably linked to the value that it can create for stakeholders, for the society in which it operates, the economy in which it operates, and the natural resources that it draws upon. So you can already see the linkages between the broader picture and just the financial standards. And that's actually really important to us. This really just speaks to the building block approach, which I already told you about. And I'm trying to race so that I get to the point where, and this speaks to the methodology that we used. What's important there is interoperability. So the ISSB standards and the European standards, which were built for Europe, whereas the ISSB standards were built as a truly global baseline, which everybody can have input to. They have an alignment of over 85%. And there will be a navigation tool that will be published so that, for example, if you're reporting according to the ISSB standards and you trade with Europe, you know exactly what is missing. You don't have to report twice. And that is one of what we call the proportionality measures. So proportionality was very, very important when we were building the ISSB standards. And there are really two key phrases that also are baked into the standards that you need to bear in mind. One is reporting is to be, quote, without undue cost and effort. That's a principle that you can apply. And secondly, with due cognizance of the skills, the capabilities, and the resources of an entity. So if you look at the more detailed deck, it will show you that, for example, if you do not have quantitative data, and you essentially argue that you do not yet have the skills, resources, and capabilities to provide quantitative data, you can provide qualitative information, and you would have complied with the standards. Do you see? So they're intended really to help entities really think through their business models and their value creation process in order to ensure that risks and opportunities of that business that may reasonably impair the financial prospects or cash flows of an entity are taken into consideration while projecting for the future. And there are various tools for doing that. I mean, I can walk through this, but really the challenges we have with data, the general knowledge and skill set challenges, and the need for capacity building, that's absolutely key. You know, the lower rankings and scores that we get from international rating agencies is key, and better disclosures actually helps us improve that. And of course, there are practices that are economic, environmental, and short, medium, and long term that are key. Let me run through this, and I'll finish this in 4 minutes. First of all, there's S1. I just want you to remember that S1 and all of this information, I would actually encourage you to pick up the standards and read them. S1 is really all sustainability-related risks. And even though there's a transitional relief that says you don't have to apply S1 in your first year, it's a very important reference point also for using S2. What's very important in S1 is really, you'll see reference to the SASB standards, which, like I said, are industry-specific disclosures. You can pick up your industry and actually already see pre-researched metrics and targets. And usually, they're on average about 8 that you can take a look at. There's application guidance and accompanying guidance to S1 that helps you with illustrative examples of actually how to apply the standards. There are specific reliefs. There's more information on that in the roadmap. There's no point in looking at it at a high level because Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria and its Adoption Readiness Working Group have already broken that down. And in that Adoption Readiness Working Group's roadmap, it proposes transitional reliefs. And so you can actually look at that and say, hey, this is not enough. or I don't think this works for us, or I think we need to do more of this, or I think we need to do it this way, or you need to shift this timeline. That's why it's on exposure until March the 14th. So you actually have an opportunity right now to shape that narrative. Effective, according to the IFRS Foundation, is 1st of January 2024. There are some early adopters in Nigeria, and I'm looking at one over here, that are early adopting. There's also the voluntary adoption route and mandatory adoption. Again, FRCN will speak about that a lot more later. S2 is the climate-related standard. I like the way that you said climate first, but not climate only. Climate first because this is what Europe started with. And because Europe has started with it, honestly, if the ISSB did not prioritize climate, then you would have had a European standard and nothing that's a global standard. That's one of the reasons why we thought it's really important to take the world's perspective into cognizance and build S2 first. But also because climate is such a very, very important issue, not just physical risks, but transition risks. And this is, for example, a breakdown of the additional things that you get from S1. Right? So you're applying S2, which is nice because we're already all on a net zero mission, but it's not just about net zero. It's also about scenario analysis, because you want to be able to project for yourself in the future, what does this mean for my business? What are my prospects as a business? Where are the biggest risks coming from? Where are the biggest opportunities coming from? And how is that going to actually affect my ability to make money? From an investor point of view, it determines then where their money flows. And from a business point of view, it determines how you allocate your resources. And because what it asks you to do is also look at supply chain and value chain, it has a significant impact on smaller entities, the informal sector included. Because how does a bottle of Coke get to the deepest rural village? It doesn't fly by DHL. That's what you said. It gets there somehow. And those are all businesses that are making money along the value chain. So one of the big questions that we've been debating, so with FRCN, we've been talking about how does Scope 3 help us think through the informal economy? It's a live discussion. That's why I took the time to give that example. But the second thing we're thinking about is how do the larger listed entities that have more resources, skills, and capabilities work with their value chain and supply chain? So the second thing that we're exploring, or that FRCN is exploring, is can we do shared supply chain engagement sessions that are technical, but at the level of the different actors, at the level of skills, capabilities, and resources, so that everybody gets involved. But the larger entities are not just cutting off supply chain actors that are non-compliant, rather that we actively encourage the embedding of sustainability-related risks and opportunities, the measurement thereof, in what the supply chain is doing. So that's an ongoing discussion. Again, Dr. Anihara can speak a little bit more to that, and I'm almost at the end. These are the key disclosures, and I thought this was, again, the other set of slides, which are longer, has a slide for each of these 6. But you can see strategy and decision-making is absolutely key. Current and anticipated financial effects, climate resilience, so that you are future-proof. Scope 1 to 3, industry-based disclosures, and climate-related targets are all things that S2 looks at. And with each of those, again, there's application guidance, there's accompanying guidance, there's a lot of detail in there, there are lots of capacity building opportunities. There's something called the ISSB Knowledge Hub. Just go to the IFRS Foundation website. Like Seb was saying, if you're a nerd or a geek, there's so much you can learn. And really what this is an opportunity for the whole world, and I know Nigerians are smarter than many, many other people in the world, to learn a new shared common language. Because everybody's on the same page. Nobody anywhere in the world can tell you that they know this better than you, except if you decided not to read. Because everybody got this information at the same time. And in fact, Nigeria raised their hand first. So if we're not the first, we have a problem. And that's it.
Thank you.